Hello, everyone.
Hello!
I had to make sure I hit the transition and not the stop streaming button again, which is something I struggle with every time we do this.
Yep. How are we going out there?
Thanks, John, for taking care of us there.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, John. Oh, well.
What
People
can you
figure it out.
But we are happy to be with you today. We've put a lot of thought and effort and planning into our discussion today, as we always do. You know, it's completely scripted. Even this, I'm just reading off my teleprompter.
We script the entire thing out all the time. We did have several discussions about what to talk about this stream.
We did. You know, and the miracle of our teleprompter is that it even includes your questions in advance when you ask them. It's like that Minority Report kind of thing. We've got a precog in a tank over here. And
just being aware. Oh man, I'm just fixing that link now in 2 places. Because I'm a genius, apparently.
No, Sin, it's because we were going to talk about Master and Apprentice today, and I haven't finished it yet. That's why.
Well, I mean, I think we always knew that. We might not make it this week. We just then failed to come up with another thing.
And it's one of those things, well, this is a little behind the scenes here at Port Haven kind of stuff. There's any number of things we could always talk about. Like I could talk.
We had 3 potential topics.
Yeah.
We just couldn't make our mind up.
But like even above that, like I could just talk about Obi-Wan for an hour or something.
Yeah.
But that feels like I don't know what's interesting to like those of you that watch this. So if you are ever interested in just like, you know, an hour-long discussion of lightsaber hilts or something, I don't know. We can give it a go.
You can figure it out. We'll give it a
go. But speaking of Dooku Jedi Lost, Jess has not listened to it yet.
I haven't started it.
And I am only halfway through, so please, for our sakes,
don't talk about it.
Those of you who have finished it, we would love to know that you have finished it. But
if you have questions, because I did ask for them, don't ask them about Jedi Lost or Master and Apprentice, because neither of us has finished Jedi Lost, and I'm the only one that's finished Master and Apprentice.
But I did finish Red Dead Redemption 2, so if you have questions about that, those...
I don't care. We could have a Red Dead Redemption 2 StreamCast. I could just pretend that I know what you're talking about.
You watched some of it, didn't you?
I did, and I know a lot of what happens. We could just do a whole stream on Dutch's plan.
Yeah, assuming that Dutch has one.
I mean, I think 2 really good topics are Dutch's plan and the Obi-Wan movie.
Yeah. They both equally exist to the same extent.
Yep.
It was funny. This has nothing to do with Star Wars, which I'm wearing a Batman shirt and you're in your new Shield hat, so we're all over the place today in terms of branding. But every time that Dutch would mention he thought about going to Tahiti, I kept thinking about the Tahiti Project from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm like, why does Dutch want to use Kree blood to bring Agent Coulson back to life? I'm confused.
Dutch needs that Kree blood. It's part of his plan.
Is Dutch a Skrull?
Maybe. I mean, hey, Carol has... Well, is it fair to spoil Captain Marvel at this point? I mean, the next movie's out.
I mean, Bear's not here, so...
I mean, Captain Marvel has Kree blood, so there you go.
Whoops.
I don't think that's really a spoiler, because I think she does in the comics anyway.
I mean, like half of the Marvel Universe and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has Kree blood now, so...
That's true.
It's not altogether uncommon. Just some people it makes carve things onto walls, and other people it gives superpowers to. So...
It's like you flip a coin. Am I going to go nuts or am I going to be cool? I don't know which one.
But so yeah, if you have Star Wars questions or questions about anything,
we do have one from Twitter we can talk about.
Why don't we start with that and we'll see where it goes.
With that, okay. It was from John from the Resistance broadcast, which is a fantastic group of people, by the way. You should be checking out the Resistance broadcast. But he asked, I talked about this with friends recently. At what moment did Anakin stop being Anakin from his own perspective? Which I think is a very interesting question. I was like, this is why you guys are a good podcast. You come up with these questions. We're like, I don't know, spaceships?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, but I also think it's, at least for me, one that seems pretty straightforward, too. Mm-hmm. At least based on, like, what Anakin has said. Because if you look at things, like when Luke in Return of the Jedi says, like, I've come to accept the fact that you were once Anakin, and Vader says that doesn't mean anything to me anymore. And, like, all of Twitter's jokes about Vader and Thrawn, like Thrawn understands what happened, at least in part, but like that doesn't mean anything. Like I don't think Vader's trying to keep it a secret so much as like it literally doesn't mean anything to him anymore.
Yeah, or at least he doesn't want it to.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a fair point too. But so like. The question, though, like, by that point, I don't think it means anything to him.
Right.
So the question is, like, from the moment that Palpatine calls him, Darth Vader, is that it? Or is it somewhere along the way? Or, I mean, because, like, when he's talking to Padme and Obi-Wan on Mustafar, like, he's been given the name Darth Vader at that point, but they are still both referring to him as Anakin.
Right. I mean, I think the way I watch Revenge of the Sith is from the moment Anakin lashes out against Windu to stop him from fighting Palpatine, and then Palpatine kills Windu, Anakin is in fight or flight mode at that point. Like, I don't know that Anakin even stops to think the rest of the movie. And it's a kind of a common critique of the prequel trilogy that you have, like, 3 movies to set up Anakin turning into Darth Vader, but it feels like he turns into Darth Vader in like 3 seconds. But the way I kind of see it is he does a simple thing, like him lashing out against Windu isn't really a big evil act at that point. I mean, yeah, he cuts his hand off, but like, I mean, what's a few hands in Star Wars? But it's not a big evil act. I think when Windu dies, Anakin knows this just got real. And he panics. So yeah, he's Darth Vader and he responds to Darth Vader, but I think the rest of that movie he is just panicking. And even when he's talking to Padme, and she's calling him Anakin, and Obi-Wan's calling him Anakin, he's never like, no, I'm actually Darth Vader now, get my name right. So either he doesn't care, or he considers himself both equally, or he just hasn't had time to think. I would think when he gets over the fact that Padme is dead, or not that he never gets over it, but like once he's heard that news and he stopped throwing his tantrum, I think that's about a point where he has to separate himself from Anakin, or he's gonna crumble.
Right.
I have only read the first story arc of Charles Soule's Darth Vader, which I know is a terrible crime. And I know it kind of.
He was on the Star Wars show today, by the way.
Oh yeah, I saw the notification. Also to be in a band in the future called Project Luminous.
Yeah. I think he plays saxophone.
Band. Yep. Such a good band. So I don't know if I reread that, if it would change my opinion on it, but I would say it's not until the very end of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah. I also had a joke about Anakin being panicking in there, and the moment kind of passed, but I'm going to throw that out there anyway.
I should pause more when I speak.
But I think you bring up something interesting, though. I think there is a long arc, and I think this is something that goes underappreciated in the prequel trilogy, and even in the Clone Wars. I think Anakin starts, like, I mean, Yoda tells Luke, once you start down the dark path, like, it's irreversible. Like,
Yeah.
and we know that that's not the truth anymore, or if it ever was. But I think it implies that it is a long path. And I think Anakin started down that path to becoming Vader a lot sooner. And I think that, like, I kind of have that same complaint about the fall happens quickly, but it really doesn't. And so, like, I think that there's probably a similar thing on the back end where, like, there's a lot of overlap as he becomes more Vader and less Anakin, and then eventually becomes less and less Anakin until there's only enough Anakin left for Luke to find.
Well, and at risk of talking about things that are going to make Sin potentially spoil stuff, and you having 3 more hours of knowledge than I do, you know, you take a character like Dooku, and he never stops going by the name Dooku once he becomes Darth Tyrannus. Now, part of that is he can't be Darth Tyrannus in public, where Vader has to be Vader in public. So it's a little bit different, granted, but I don't feel like Dooku ever stops seeing himself as Count Dooku.
Right.
You know, he's still, in the Clone Wars, we see he still has his place on Sereno. He still very much carries himself like somebody with a title. So I don't know that losing your old identity is intrinsically part of becoming a Sith Lord. You look at Palpatine. Palpatine still has to go by Palpatine, again, because of being in the shadows. But, you know, I don't know that that's necessarily a thing that has to happen. I think for Anakin, he does it because he has to compartmentalize.
I mean, and I think that would have been a thing that Palpatine pushed on him, too, to try to sever any connections he might have had because of what he was asking him to do.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just I've given you a new name. Like, even from Palpatine, it was different with Anakin than it was with Dooku. I think that makes sense to me, too.
Well, I mean, unless you have more to say on this, as long as we're free-forming, that kind of makes me think of something, which I know you like to pick on me about Jedi being baby stealers. But that, you know, identity with Jedi is kind of, like, they like to keep that separated, right? And they don't really have you change your name. As far as we can tell, Jedi children, like younglings come in, they still have the name of whoever they were, so presumably they could use Space Google to figure out who they were. But letting go of your non-Jedi self is a big deal. But with Sith, how important do you think it is that you don't know who you were to be a Sith Lord? I mean, we don't really have a lot of that in canon right now. In Legends, largely you became a Sith when, like, your family was dead, so it didn't really matter.
Right.
I mean, in the Plagueis novel, Palpatine kills his whole family. It was one of the parts of that novel I liked, actually. But I'm just kind of curious, like, what your thoughts are on that, like, the difference between what a Jedi might think of with, shall we say, a civilian life, for lack of a better phrase, compared to, like, a Sith.
I mean, I don't know. I think that a Sith, in a similar way to a Jedi, like, I think part of that philosophy depends on you believing that's who you were all along. Like, I was this Sith, and I just didn't realize it. Or, like, or even with, like, I feel like that's part of the Jedi narrative, is that even if I were not brought to the temple as a baby when I was stolen away from my parents who had no choice in it according to Republic law or whatever, I don't know.
At gunpoint.
But, like,
on pain of death.
We'll ask Karen Travis about it. She can fill us in. But I feel like like, Luke was a Jedi. Like, Luke was not less of a Force user. He didn't know it. Like,
right.
And it took Obi-Wan's training to bring it out in him. But, like, I don't think Luke would have said, I was something different before or after. And maybe Luke is, or if you want to go into, like, Legends, somebody like Corran, people that had lives before they came to the Jedi Order. We don't really get that in new canon as much. Or even somebody like Jolie Bendo in Legends, who was a Jedi and then had a life afterwards.
Yeah. That is true too.
But I feel like with a Sith, like part of that is you would be convincing yourself this is my true self. Like this thing that Sith philosophy has revealed in me is who I was all along, even if I didn't realize it at the time.
Well, I think too for the Jedi and the Sith, the difference is the Jedi are in theory trying to reject their the self, right? They're trying to reject any kind of selfish intention and join it's more important to be in the Jedi Order maybe than to be a Jedi, right? And that's Qui-Gon's big problem with the Jedi Order, is that he doesn't necessarily fit into the flow of the institution as well. Where with the Sith, they're so individualistic. So to the Jedi, your family shouldn't matter because the Jedi and the galaxy at large is your more important family. Where with the Sith, your family doesn't matter because only you matter.
Right.
So in a weird sort of way, they have the same outcome for drastically different reasons.
Right.
Which is part of what really makes the Jedi and Sith so interesting to look at back to back.
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. That I don't need a connection to other people because I am, as Knox would say if he were here, self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient, yes.
Like I think that whether he knows it or not, maybe it's intentional. I think that fits that narrative. But I mean, it also, to tie it back into the other question too, does Vader then become Anakin again? Or was he still Anakin all along? And this is something that I feel like new canon is wrestling with too, is did Kylo stop being Ben?
Right.
Because even the name, Ben Demption, people who are anticipating Kylo's redemption, whether or not that happens, that implies that a redeemed person would no longer be Kylo Ren.
Right.
Is it, we don't even know that they are Sith in the same way anymore. But if he is redeemed, does that mean he goes back to being Ben? Or is there a place in the world for Kylo Ren who has been redeemed from his dalliances with the dark side? Even that way of thinking about it puts an interesting, because I don't think he sees himself as Ben anymore.
No.
And so if Vader were redeemed in a way that allowed him to live, which Ben might be, do you then go back? Do you go back and say Kylo Ren was a mistake? I was never Kylo Ren. Vader was a mistake. I am no longer Vader. What does that look like on the backside too? I think makes it an interesting question also.
Well, and to me, the notion of what's going to happen to Ben, I have my preferences as to what I would like. I mean, I just called him Ben. I have my. It's no secret on this channel how I feel about Ben Solo, but I feel like the struggle with. Yeah, I know, Sen. We'll get to it. I promise. I just reviewed a book that's been out for a month, so we're trying. But I think the larger question with Kylo/Ben right now is really putting into context Vader's redemption. I mean, I started my redemption series. I've done 2 videos. I will do more. But I've also done a video on Ben Solo/Kylo Ren and what his redemption looks like in comparison to Vader's. And the struggle with canon right now is Vader's redemption to Anakin is actually really not that spelled out.
Yeah.
And it's one of those cases, it's better than, but similar to Padme dying of sadness. There's a point where you can have a text, and this text is canon, and this text declares the rules of the universe that you're operating in, but the rules that it declares are kind of difficult to deal with.
Right.
So if you look at Vader's redemption, it's supposed to be his love for Luke turned him back into a good person. And in order to believe that, you have to believe that. Like, the only evidence of that is that Anakin shows up as a Force ghost. Because you can even argue that him saving his son is a selfish act. And this is something I kind of talked about in one of the videos. And so what I think a lot of people are hoping / fearing is, like, there's the worry that if Ben is redeemed, it's going to be too easy. That It's either going to be, oh, he's just a sad boy and his mom loves him again and, like, Rey's pretty, so he's a good guy now, which I don't necessarily want it to be that simple. Or the only way for him to be redeemed is for him to die, which I think is too much like Vader. So it becomes this issue of, with one movie left, if he's redeemed, like, can you do something different and like show it as a journey? I don't even know. Now I've kind of lost myself, if I'm being completely honest. But hey, it's a freeform discussion. But I think that's kind of the nature too, where the sequel trilogy is going.
Right. Well, I think that too, though, on some level, it's an issue of semantics, but like, it also has to be more than that, because we're told that it's more than that. Like, if it was just semantics, then Vader would say, "Oh yeah, I used to be Anakin, but now I'm not." But that's not what he says. He says, like, that's not, like, that means nothing to me. Like, that is as if it was a different person. And so I feel like that has to mean something. And it's just really interesting to me, like, this idea, you know, if Ben is redeemed, like I used to do this when The Force Awakens came out. I've always called him Ben, because like that's just what feels natural to me. But if, with all of his let the past die, like, I think there's a possible future where he is redeemed and is still like, no, I can't go back to being Ben Solo. Like, like, I am a different person than Ben Solo was. And maybe I'm also different than Kylo Ren, but still, that's meaningful. I mean, but then you look at somebody like Revan too. Like, Revan never changed his name; he was always Revan. But like, pre-Mandalorian War Revan is different than in the War Revan, is different than Sith Revan, is different than Memory Wipe Revan, is different than Revan that marries Bastila and has kids. Like, that's a very different kind of thing too. So I don't know.
I guess, and that reminds me of where I was heading towards with my point with Ben and Anakin, is at some level I feel like it's important to remember that Vader is always Anakin, because this is that kind of danger hole that people talk about, where if you really differentiate, like, between Vader and Anakin, as if there's some point where you can flip a switch that releases Anakin of his guilt for the things he did. Right. And so then does it become, was it Vader who popped up early and killed the Sand People, and then it goes back to Anakin? John Barry in the chat even says he sees dark side personas as similar to kind of like a multiple personality disorder. And is it really that? Because that would make sense if dark side stuff was like a possession, like Kip Duran in Jedi Academy trilogy. But I think at some level it's evil because it's still the person. Like, Ben Solo is Kylo Ren, is doing these bad things. And as a Bendemptionist, I don't mind saying that, because I can't want redemption for someone if I don't think they have something to be redeemed from. So I think it's important to note that really the idea of what name someone is symbolizes how they see themselves. And like that compartmentalization really is either a way to separate yourself from your good past so that you don't feel guilt for what you're doing now because you just are this person, or alternatively, if you are redeemed, to separate yourself from the bad person so you don't have to feel that guilt. I know for me, when I'm talking about Anakin or Vader or Ben or Kylo, I usually use the name based off the time period we're talking about. I mean, if I'm talking about Anakin in the Clone Wars, I call him Anakin. If I'm talking about Anakin in Empire Strikes Back, I call him Vader, because that's just the time period, right? And like, I often refer to Kylo as Kylo because he's only in content right now where he's Kylo. And it's not a reflection that I don't see him as Ben. Right. It's a reflection of what I'm seeing now, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, I just think, too, even though I don't see how the Rise of Skywalker could refer to anything but Ben Solo, personally. Right. I can just see him coming out on the end of this and saying, especially if Leia dies in this film, which we don't know if she will.
Right.
But if she died, saying, my father's dead, my mother's dead, my uncle's gone, like that boy that I was in the hut when Luke, came in that night, like that boy is not me anymore. And so I'm not going to be Ben Solo anymore. Like,
right.
Like maybe he even takes on the name Ben Skywalker. Like I don't even know.
Who knows?
But like I can just see something like that happening too. But it I remember, I don't know if you remember, we've had these conversations before, but I always think too, to pivot back to Anakin and Vader a minute too. Like I've always said, especially in like Legends as well, when we think about post Return of the Jedi, like Luke and Leia both got visions from Anakin after the fact. And Leia very understandably struggled with that. Like when I'm trying to remember when it was where he appeared.
Tatooine Ghost, right?
Yes, I'm pretty sure it was.
By Benning?
Yeah. When she appears to Leia and Leia's like, I can't do this. Like you are not.
Right.
Like, I cannot see you as anything but Darth Vader, who destroyed the only family I've ever known in my entire planet and civilization. And tortured me. Yeah, like, all this stuff. And it's always been a thing. I've always said that Luke got Anakin and Leia got Vader.
Right. It's like, very apparent in Bloodline.
Yeah. And, that's I wasn't even thinking about Bloodline. That's a great point. And maybe that's even when I had this thought was
I think Bloodline. It is when you had the thought.
But I think that gets at the duality of it too, is that either because Leia had personal interactions with Vader for longer and in different tone than what Luke did. Like Luke always saw, well, not always, Luke by the end at least very much saw the good in him and saw him as Anakin in a way that I don't think Leia ever could.
Right.
And I think that gets at that duality too from a different perspective.
Well, and it even gets to, if you look at The Last Jedi, and I don't mean this as a slam on Leia at all, but when Han couldn't get through to Ben/Kylo, she's talking to Leia, or Leia's talking to Luke on Crate, and it's like, then I've really lost him, and that's where Luke's line, "No one's ever truly gone," comes in. And Leia has already kind of just chosen to accept that her son's gone because she couldn't save him.
Right.
When really it's just he's got to save himself, and the right catalyst hasn't shown up yet. But in the same way, I kind of wonder if that ties back to she could never see the good in Anakin like Luke could. And maybe that relationship with her father is why she has a hard time seeing the potential future relationship with her son, who's trying to be his grandfather. And then that's why you have Luke and Leia's differing opinions on what's going to happen with him. And with Luke has the advantage of getting to be there. Luke has the vision on Dagobah, which even though it's largely about him, I think that connects him to Vader in a way.
Right.
And then Luke is there when Vader is redeemed. And those are two moments that Leia never gets. And she literally finds out that Vader is Luke's father, and then that she is Luke's sister, like in the back third of the film, basically, of Return of the Jedi. So she doesn't have a lot of time to process.
Yeah.
And has had, at that point in time in her life, has had very little, any kind of anything that would make her attuned to the Force.
Right.
To feel it happen either.
No. I mean, but I just think back to that original question was, when did Anakin stop seeing himself as Anakin?
Yep.
And maybe the answer is when everybody else did. You know, because, you know, Yoda stops referring to him as Anakin. At some point, Obi-Wan stops referring to him as Anakin. Palpatine stops referring to him as Anakin. Like everyone, like Padme's dead at this point. Like everyone he knows has no longer sees him as Anakin. And that has to have an impact on this too. And if we're thinking about Ben Demption, the fact that Rey sees him as Ben, maybe the fact that Leia sees him as Ben, like maybe that makes a difference. And you know, not to take away from Anakin or Kylo's own choices, but like Anakin's story is tragic for a lot of reasons, and I think that's part of it.
Well, and I think that's a good point too. Is just Anakin is surrounded by people that only refer to him as Vader, and I just really feel like Anakin stopped seeing himself as Anakin when he didn't want to be Anakin anymore. I mean, we see him as Anakin Skywalker, but Vader would see Anakin as a failure. Yeah. You know, the man who failed to save his mother, the man who failed to save his wife. I don't think he actually cared about his children at that point in time, which is my theory as to why he couldn't tell that Padme was carrying twins, is he never checked because he never cared that he had kids. That's always been my own headcanon because of his obsessive possession of Padme. But I think there's a point where Anakin really wants to stop being Anakin because it hurts too much to be Anakin. And I feel like that's actually something, if you go to the Gillen Vader comics, it's probably in the Soul Vader comics as well, because I know I hear they're great. I just haven't read them yet. Although I'm saying that I may regret having not read them because I think they're getting referenced in Jedi Lost as well, but that's okay. But Gillen's Vader goes after A New Hope, and there's a point where Vader is almost defeated, and he's like, somebody has shut down his suit, he can't move, he can't do anything, and he has this vision of Padme, and there's this point where Vader becomes stronger when he can embrace Anakin's pain.
Right.
It's almost like he was Anakin, and then he had this like nebulous limbo phase, and then he became Vader. And then before his redemption, he had to hit this point where he saw himself, or like he was Vader, but he couldn't let go of Anakin, because without Anakin, he doesn't have the type of pain that makes him powerful within the dark side.
Well, and I think we see that too. I'm pretty sure this is in Lords of the Sith. And it may be in the Gillen Vader comics too, where Palpatine like makes fun of him, like straight to his face, like, "Oh, are you really just Anakin, like this scared little boy still, or are you something different?" Like I'm pretty sure like that conversation happens a lot in Lords of the Sith, because all I remember about those interactions is Palpatine like just haranguing Vader the whole time, and like even to have that reinforced. Yeah, like you just but like he's getting it from all over, and that can't help but contribute to that struggle too.
Yeah, and in these particular pages, which are not, I held up as best I could, he's seeing Padme, and he's actually Padme is asking him to stay with her, which actually means he would die and join her. But then he like is force choking Vision Padme to like let go of it. So that might actually go a little bit. Yeah, this actually goes counter to everything I just said in the comic. It says right here, Vader saying, "Anakin is dead. I killed him." So I think for Vader, he was really trying to let go of Anakin, and kind of holding on to this is letting go of the past. So that goes a little bit counter to what I was saying.
Right.
Well, I just remembered that scene.
Not to get too much into current fandom things, but like, what does this say about people who like Vader and not Anakin? Because like I remember at the time of the Phantom Menace, a lot of people saying, Darth Vader is this, you know, best villain in film cinema history, not a whiny little 9-year-old.
Right.
Like all the hate for Jake Lloyd, like that's what it is. Vader is this larger than life figure and not Anakin. So like what do we say to people that are like that who are fans? Or maybe that's us. Like we admire Vader and think of Vader as separate than Anakin. Like, are we part of that? Are we buying into that?
That's a good question. Because again, like I said, I differentiate just because the character does change so much to me, and there's a different context. I feel like if you're stuck in an elevator with Anakin Skywalker, you're probably not going to die. If you're stuck in an elevator with Vader, you might. It's kind of the difference. But it's just kind of that point where he's at in life. I think villain adoration is a very interesting, that really is something that fiction gives us. Because real life, if I were to have adoration for a real life villain, that would be troubling. But in fiction, we can do that. And there's always, I think sometimes there's a discussion to be had for when is that okay and when isn't it. But fiction is always kind of this way to explore things we can't do. This is way off topic, but not really. One of the most well-known sitcoms of all time is Seinfeld. And the point of Seinfeld is that there are 4 very terrible people. Like, the 4 main characters on Seinfeld are just awful, awful people. And you watch them just say all the terrible things and, like, do all the terrible things. But it was funny because you were laughing at them, but you all also secretly, like, wanted to be doing the terrible things, too. And villains in fiction are kind of a way for people to kind of explore their pain and explore the things that can make a person a villain. Right. I mean, that's the big debate with Kylo right now, is a lot of people just see him as this terrible person who reminds them of other terrible people in your life, or their life. And for other people, they can relate to Kylo because he's someone who's given in to the pain they deal with. And it's cathartic, right, to see somebody who's kind of gone through that, and then to feel like you don't have to end up doing the things Kylo's done. I don't know if any of that answers your question, but
I mean, I think it does. But even on a different level, like I think I see this go around on Twitter, and even some Star Wars creators get involved in these types of conversations about like Vader is meant to be like the literal embodiment of space fascism.
Yeah.
So, like, can you say Vader's a cool thing? I want to cosplay as Vader. I want a Darth Vader coffee mug, separate from saying I advocate fascism. And, and I mean, for me, I think the answer to that is definitely yes. But for some people, it's not. And I think we can't so easily dismiss that either. You know, I live in a part of the world where certain flags are flown with regularity that represent those types of things for me, and like and I don't know, like I don't know, or I mean, or you can also just write a comic about a person that has a fetish for leather and a guy in a mask, and it isn't reciprocated. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a line somewhere, and I think with all fiction it becomes responsibility. I mean, you could even take that, a step farther, because I feel like intent behind things is so important. Yeah. So, like, the big issue with, I have not read a comic that you may or may not have been referencing, but the big issue behind it was not knowing the intent behind why it was written.
Yeah.
And the intent behind why it was written is at the core of why people feel attacked or don't feel attacked.
Yeah, sure.
The author has said what he wants his intention to be, but then it goes down to, do you believe him or not, which is a whole separate question we don't need to get into. But similarly to other things, is just issues of representation. Yeah. And like, is is a certain group being added to fill a checklist? Is a certain group being added because they genuinely want readers and viewers to feel included? And the intent can kind of impact how well that representation is conveyed.
Yeah.
Versus and how accepted it is. I mean, like we were talking on our Afra stream, Dr. Afra is one of the most inclusive comics in Star Wars, certainly, if not. I don't read enough other comics to know how it fares otherwise. But that's done largely from the writers and the team behind it want to be inclusive. They're not doing it for a checklist. So that's why the characters come off so well in that comic, because the right heart is behind it. Again, I might be taking your question way off, but like that to me is kind of the behind why do you want to cosplay as a stormtrooper? Like, do you want to cosplay as a stormtrooper because your intent is, I want to march in an army and like shoot small children, or the armor's cool. I mean, cool armor is cool armor. Yeah. That's just a thing that we all have a need for. And traditionally, especially in Star Wars, the bad guys have cooler armor. When your good guys wear like robes, you know, it's pretty easy to guess which one you'd rather be. I mean, frick, I got into Kylo because I like his armor because it reminds me of Revan, and then after that, I discovered I liked the character too. But I don't want to be a fascist that destroys planets just because I like Kylo's armor.
Come for the mask and stay for the shirtless.
You know, I didn't mind that scene. I didn't need that scene, but I didn't mind that scene either. That's usually how we'll put it.
I mean, but the issues of representation, I think, are interesting too as we talk about this, because like another thing is, like, I feel like Star Wars does a really good job of being more representative today, but it hasn't always.
Right.
And so, like, there was a point in time where if you were a young African-American man and you wanted to see yourself in Star Wars says, here's Lando. Yep. And Lando isn't always the best person. Or even, like, when Aftermath came out, you know, a lot was made, I think more of it was made by the internet than the books made about Cinder sexuality.
Right.
But, like, Cinder, like, if you're a person that, you know, identifies as LGBTQ, you know, then you may not want to be Cinder, but like Cinder is not necessarily the best person all the time, and but if that's like who you're given, like, then that affects who we see ourselves as too. Or even like I've seen like a lot of like gender bending cosplays and stuff like that. Or, you know, so like, what if I see myself and identify in something that's completely different than who I am? Like, I think all of that sort of gets at these same types of questions too, and I think all of that's fair. To be honest, yeah.
Well, to kind of go on that in my own experience with Star Wars, I'm lucky as a white brunette. I have a lot of options for women in Star Wars, so you know, I can't really I can't really complain. But growing up, I always felt kind of weird because I feel like every Star Wars fangirl is like supposed to idolize Leia. And I don't like dislike Leia. I mean, she's great. Carrie Fisher's wonderful. But like, I never really wanted to be Leia. Leia's personality is not necessarily mine. And so I would kind of, oddly enough, I found myself in like a short green frog man. So there you go. But with the sequel trilogy, I connect to Rey a lot more than I do other Star Wars women. And like when I finally found that person that I kind of like saw myself in literally, but then also found myself in from a metaphorical stance, I'm like, oh, this is what people mean. Like I had never really had it, and I didn't realize I didn't have it. I was fine. But then I was like, oh, I think I get it now. And that's really kind of changed how I view the whole topic now that I finally like have that connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, and it's admittedly, it is a privileged thing for me to not to have ever had to think about that before. because everything always ever is meant at making me feel like I'm the most important person in the world. So like that's not really a thing, but like even not that this is the same thing, but like my moniker on Star Wars internet for over a decade now has been Django, because I played a video game and saw a movie and I thought, man, that guy looks cool. Like not because I admired his morals or wanted to like live my life by his code or something. And like nobody questions that. You know? So like I don't know.
No, I think the heart of the issue. Also, hello, Jake. I saw you slipped in. Welcome. Yes, the poor blonde women in Star Wars. They have, Captain Phasma. If she has the same hair color as Gwendolyn Christie, I mean that's pretty cool.
It does make me think, though. One of the things that was true in Game of Thrones for a long time, that with one exception, all the blonde people were bad. Like if you wanted a shorthand for who was good or who was bad, like even the Gregory brothers did a video about this one time.
Remember that.
Like all blonde characters are evil and all the brunettes are good people. So it's a visual cue sometimes too.
That's funny. That's funny. Anyway, but yeah, it is a complicated issue too, because like I said, for a long time, my connection to Star Wars was a 900-year-old frog puppet. Like, obviously, I don't see myself physically in Yoda at all, but that was like not somebody I saw myself in, but as much as somebody I aspired to be.
Yeah.
I could only look up to metaphorically, and he would hit me if I made that joke and he was real. But anyway, you know, so I certainly don't think it's something where it needs to be like a 1-to-1 ratio. But when you can find that character where it's close, like it's a very different experience. And that was not something I understood for a while, and that now I'm starting to get. But I've also always been the personality type where I've not needed it as much as others, and that's born from my own place of privilege as well, and I understand that. But when I kind of like saw that and understood it, I'm like, oh, okay. Like, even if I don't need it, I get why it's good to have. Yeah.
So in summary, spoilers are bad.
Yeah, right.
Don't spoil things for people.
Oh man, that's been a whole online discussion right now, because it's been crazy, because we had Endgame and all y'all are in Game of Thrones right now, and then we've had like a bunch of big Star Wars books and content come out, and everyone's just like talking about spoilers all the time.
Well, it used to be way different with Game of Thrones for me, because people would be so hung up on spoilers, and I'm like, you realize this book came out 12 years ago.
Right.
Like, I've known for a long time what was going on until things changed. But
yeah. It was funny. But no, all of this stuff in general. And I think, to kind of go back to the villains thing for a second, I think that's part of it, like I said, is for some people, they want to connect to the villain because the villain's journey to becoming a villain is like theirs. And I would say that it's this cathartic experience to see someone do the things they're trying not to do, not in a scary, you should be afraid of that person, but just in a, I mean, it's an inborn human thing. Like I talked about, I was streaming The Force Unleashed. I was playing that game in college, and sometimes I'd have a really rough midterm, and just to de-stress, I would play that game and throw stormtroopers off a cliff. It doesn't mean I really want to throw people off a cliff, but it was that I could kind of like get the chance to see what my rage would be like,
right?
If I was allowed to use it. And some stories can do it in such a way where it can show you it feels good until it doesn't. Like, I think Kylo's story is largely he's doing all the things he wanted to do. I think if you look at the end of The Last Jedi, he's killed Snoke, he's killed his father, his mother. I personally believe that he knows his mother's alive through the Force, but I don't know if it's been established one way or another. But, like, her rebellion is almost done. Like, he's done all these super evil bad things that he's been wanting to do.
Right.
And the last shot of him in The Last Jedi is him, like, on the ground seeing Force dice, making him think of his father, and he's, completely pathetic. And I don't mean that in he's pathetic, but I mean, like, he has nothing.
Yeah.
And even though he's done everything he's wanted, and it kind of can show you that giving into all of these dark emotions feels really good.
Right.
But ultimately, where does it get you?
Yeah. I don't know. I can't say much. My video game catharsis was playing FIFA and going for people's knees. So that's way worse. So, I will say though, maybe we should come in with no topic more often.
Right, because I feel like big shout out to John from the Resistance broadcast, because man,
yeah,
I feel like
saved our butts today.
We should just ask him what we should talk about every week.
There you go. So what did they talk about last week? That's what we'll do next week.
We'll become Diet Resistance broadcast.
There are worse things to be.
That's true. That's true.
I almost named some names, but before we do that, why don't we just go ahead and call it here?
General site notes. Tomorrow there will not be a game stream. Because I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm gonna be listening to Jedi Lost. I finally will have time tomorrow, and I'm gonna listen to it. Hopefully we'll actually do a Friday, because we haven't done a Friday in a while. Saturday is Star Wars Day. Something will happen Star Wars Day. I will very potentially be moving the game stream to Saturday for Star Wars Day, so we can hang out. But I don't know that for a fact. And then we'll go from there. I have a couple other bigger things I need to get to, so I need to do another redemption video so we can see that. Django, you had something you might have wanted to talk about at the end of the stream.
Yeah, and other site stuff. We are looking at we're hopefully we'll put out something more official about this soon. But we have been talking about soliciting some new contributors, primarily to our blog site.
Yes.
So if you are interested in doing any news reporting or reviewing any books or comics or things along those nature, maybe even doing written reviews episode by episode for Resistance episodes or for Mandalorian episodes or the new Clone Wars episodes, those types of things. We are looking, again, primarily for blog site help. But if you write, or maybe you are looking at writing some of these reviews, maybe you are already doing some of this type of stuff. If you'd like to come on board, you can get in touch with us, or just look for our more formal thing coming pretty soon about that.
Yeah, we've always wanted to grow the blog site more. Personally, YouTube keeps me pretty busy, and then Django is usually just fixing everything behind the scenes all of the time. So we're looking for another kind of pillar that can kind of join with us, and we'd support and work with you and all of that, but to help us grow the blog site portion, because right now the majority of the blog site is articles saying I've released a video.
Right. But that kind of stuff is really easy to do, especially if you're staying in touch with Star Wars news or reading Star Wars books and comics anyway. All you got to do is write a little bit for us, and we will be happy to bring you on board with that. So more information about that to come, but just to put that out there into the ether for you to be thinking about. But I think that is going to mostly do it for us today.
Yeah.
So make sure you follow us on all of the things. You're already here on YouTube, so if you have not hit that like button yet, or even the dislike button, just hit a button letting us know that you were here.
Something. Give us that engagement.
Yep, that sweet algorithm juice is what we run on here. And while you're at it, right there by that like button is that subscribe button. So if you're not already, you can subscribe, hit that notification bell, and all your devices will just tell you when we go live, whether or not we have a topic. You'll get that notification. We're also on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, all the places. Check out our Discord, link in the description. I could do that YouTuber thing and like point to it. It's there-ish. But that's gonna do it for us this week, and we will see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.